Good morning. In this series of lectures, we are going to discuss certain issues in applied linguistics as part of our syllabus in this module. This is the continuation of some lectures on language learning. Lecture 8, An Introduction to Second Language Learning. Language learning is a major theme in applied linguistics. It includes both first language acquisition and second language learning. In this lecture, we'll discuss some issues in second language learning. Of course, this is only an introduction. Second language learning research is very wide-ranging. A central point in our lecture is to define the term second language. A second language, L2 or SL, broadly refers to any language that is learned after the first language, L1. This can be the second, the third, or even the fourth language, etc. And this includes the foreign language. Thus, the term second language appears to be a cover term for all non-native forms of learning. Now we define second language acquisition. We often encounter this term in the literature. There is a good definition of this field of research. Second language acquisition is roughly defined as the methodical or the systematic formal study through empirical findings of the learning processes and teaching practices. So it has two components. The learning processes, it concerns the learner, and the teaching practices, it concerns the teacher, related to the acquisition of non-native languages, all non-native languages. Most researchers tend to use the term second language learning as a cover term for all non-native language learning. This is encountered in the literature. So here, second language learning refers to the learning process, and second language acquisition refers to the study of the learning process and also the teaching practices. Second language acquisition is a wide-ranging research. The scope is large. It includes informal L2 learning which happens in natural contexts without receiving explicit instruction. Formal L2 learning which takes place in schools by receiving explicit instruction, and L2 learning that involves the combination of these settings and circumstances. In this lecture and in the following lectures, we are not focusing on the differences between learning and acquisition, as we have explained this earlier. Sometimes I will be using learning and acquisition interchangeably. Also, I'm not going to focus on the difference between foreign language and second language. Most of the time, we'll use a second language to cover the foreign language. If we trace the history of applied linguistics, we'll see clearly that the beginning of second language acquisition research is traced to the late 60s, when this interdisciplinary enterprise, which borrowed equally from the fields of language teaching, linguistics, child language acquisition, and psychology, came into existence. During the 80s and the 90s particularly, second language acquisition developed significantly and in its scope and in its methodology, and it reached its status as an autonomous discipline, an independent discipline, by the end of the 20th century. One of the themes of second language acquisition is the stages of second language acquisition. We have seen in previous lectures that first language acquisition follows well-defined stages. All children go through the same stages when acquiring their native languages. Is it the case in second language acquisition? According to second language acquisition on L2 learning in natural contexts, 3 developmental stages can be distinguished. The first one is the silent period. The second is called formulaic speech, and the third is called structural and semantic simplification. During the silent period, learners opt for a lengthy silent period. They do not produce anything in the target language, especially when immediate production is not required from them. This helps them to discover the language. Research shows that passing or going through this period has to do with the type of learner, his social or cognitive orientation. Some learners are other-directed, while others are inner-directed. Research shows that the silent period contributes to build competence in the second language via listening. Others see that this is a stage of rejection or incomprehension. The learner does not understand the target language. The second stage of second language acquisition is formulaic speech. Formulaic speech means expressions which are learned by the second language learner as wholes, and they are employed on particular occasions. The learner does not analyze their parts. They are used to fulfill certain speech acts. This happens in the learner's speech irrespective of their age. The last phase is called structural and semantic simplification. Structural means syntactic, and semantic is related to meaning. Here, learners have the tendency to simplify the utterances that they produce. In the case of structural simplification, the learners tend to omit some grammatical words like auxiliaries or articles, and some endings, inflections, like the plural s or past tense ed, while in semantic simplification, learners drop some content words, which normally should occur in an utterance. Another major theme in second language acquisition research is individual differences and their effect on the process of learning a second language. We have previously seen in a previous lecture, that when learning a person's first language, children, regardless of the languages that they speak as their native language, tend to follow the same stages, and the learning process is identical for all children. But this is not the case for second language learners. Second language learners differ according to certain factors, which can be social or psychological. Research shows that cardinal differences exist among L2 learners. It is argued that they are not all the same, nor do they achieve identical degrees of proficiency over time in the second language. There are psychological and social factors which influence the learning process. The role of such differences had attracted scholarly attention in recent years. In fact, there is not a single approach to studying such differences and the factors influencing them. If we try to count the factors which influence the process of learning a second language, the list will be very long. Different researchers have focused on different factors. Among the factors that have been examined by scholars in the field, we have the following: age, sex or gender, previous experience with language learning, proficiency in the native language, personality factors like extroversion or introversion, language aptitude, attitudes and motivation, intrinsic motivation, extrinsic motivation, general intelligence, the IQ, sense modality preference or sensory preference, sociological preference, like learning with peers or learning with the teacher, cognitive styles, learner strategies, field independence, anxiety, self-esteem, hemisphere specialization, memory, and so on. You have certainly dealt with most of these factors in didactics. The discussion of how these factors influence second language learning is lengthy, but the point that we should emphasize here is that second language learners differ in the speed and degree of success in learning second language because of these factors. Therefore, second language teachers should be equipped with a good knowledge about these factors. If the instructors are equipped with concrete data about the features of their learners, who are their learners in terms of age, in terms of first language, in terms of motivation, aptitude, cognitive style, and so on. So in any teaching context, this would enable them to adjust, to adapt the instructional content, their methodology, in such a way that it meets the learner's characteristics. It fits a specific type of learners. Therefore, teaching may differ from one class to another based just on these factors.